Dharma Physics. It's the physics of the mind. It's understanding how the mind swings this way and that way, and how to get it to center itself so that it's not draining the vitality with unnecessary anxiousnesses and jealousies and all of the difficult emotions. Pavan is breath. Pavan. Para is like beyond the beyond. It's like, where is it coming from, this breath? Para. In other words, who knows? Beyond the beyond, it's beyond conception. But we have this respiration. As long as we have it, we live. And then when we don't have it, we no longer live in this body. But the word Pavan means carrier, but what it's inferring is it's the carrier of the life force. So when we say Pavan, it's not just breath in a purely anatomical way, but breath as something that is very much alive, and as something that is really the connection that we have to our source of what we are. It's our source of electricity, very literally. It's not philosophy. In that sense, it's certainly not religion. But when you have the breath, you're alive, and when you don't have the breath, this body isn't operating anymore. So the breath as the carrier of the chi, of the prana, of the life force. And life force is what really most of yoga and Ayurveda and all the great mystical sciences are based upon, and at least in part. And to understand how the life force operates in the body is advantageous, because then it allows us to have also a better sense of how our minds operate. And really the main determining factor in whether I'm going to be able to feel happy or not is my mind. It's so easy to say, so really impossible at times to change. You can only change when it comes to these things in baby steps, really. But baby steps are like infinite leaps. That's the secret, though. They really are. That's my experience, at least, is when you just kind of focus on baby steps as a way of getting your mind relaxed around not trying too hard, not trying to go too fast, because as soon as you really try to rush it or go faster than is really necessary, possible, etc., then it creates friction, and then that makes everything a little more difficult. And so part of it is just appreciating how we are as we are, and to learn how the life force operates is to experience it, and to feel our bodies, and to feel our minds, and then to feel how we can work with the energies in the body in order to influence our minds, to move in a direction of more happiness. And that is hard in the sense that when doing these types of practices, it does open up the field of awareness, so it allows us to observe the patterns of our mind more clearly, which is not always easy, because I'll become aware of some fantastic things. At first they always say, when the first kind of stage of Kundalini process is that you're feeling like amazing. Like it's kind of like, being shown the light. You can now understand why people come and knock on your door and tell you about the good news. These things, don't do that, please. And do they do that in California? They do that in California. I grew up in the Southeast, and they definitely do that in the Southeast. Knock on your door and tell you about the good news. Yeah. And so when you become aware of the patternings of the mind, the first stage is when you feel incredible, right? And I think that's what people sometimes we call as you've become awake. You got people who are awake and people who are not as awake. And I'm kind of not into that whole thing, really, because it creates a sense of division. And how do I know? I only know my own personal experience. So as soon as I start to kind of think of awakened people versus non-awakened people, I think it's a slippery slope there, even though there may be some relative truth in that. You have people who are, you could call active growth people. something like that, perhaps. But even still, we should be skeptical that we know too much about anybody else, I think. Because you never know, people... I was thinking about this earlier, and like in the Grateful Dead community, if you only interacted with deadheads online, you would think they were horrible people. And because they're always just arguing, bickering about things and putting other people down. And I think that's for me, it was good to kind of experience that, because if you meet deadheads in person, they're always the most amazing people, almost always. And I think that's true in general. In a certain way, is that when we're experiencing people through the lens of the categories that we've placed upon them, In some ways, they've placed upon themselves. It was them that put the Trump sign in the front yard, or whatever. And so then that'll make my projection about that person. And my projection will be wrong, at least in some ways, for sure. Our good friend and brother, and really kind of one of the real engineers of Life Force Academy, Joshua, who lives in Asheville, when they were having that crisis moment, he said that was like his neighbor across the street had the sign in the front, and they've never even talked before. And then the whole crisis in Asheville with all the flooding happened, and turns out they like each other just fine, and that they know that they're neighbors and they have each other's back. So this is good. And to believe in people, and to really be looking for the good in people, I think is a nice way to live, and a happy way to live. It doesn't mean that we're naive. Doesn't mean that we're lacking in wisdom, and I think, in fact, quite the opposite. But you start through the lens of love by looking for the good in a person, and even if people are causing tremendous suffering to others, which some these dictator types definitely are, and who knows, and all sorts, and it's not to point fingers at the suffering's coming from the outside. It's first and foremost to open the field of awareness. And the reason why it's difficult is I'm noticing how I'm causing suffering. How I'm causing suffering to myself via my mental habit and emotional habits that are subconsciously based. And how I'm causing suffering to also those around me, particularly the ones who are the most closest to me, means particularly the ones I love the most. So that's a drag. But it's not a drag. It's a drag when you feel that you're causing suffering, but it's a joy to change it. And then the only way to change it is to first notice it. So then, after going through that process a gazillion times, it feels like, eventually you can start to enjoy even that process, to where at first it's not wrapped in so much shame and guilt and feeling self-loathing when I'm noticing my inner patterns, but more of self-love and self-compassion. Because when we're realistic and honest with ourselves that we ourselves are suffering, then we'll naturally feel compassion. And we don't have to, little by little, once again, baby steps. But if you go, this is why the baby steps are like infinite leaps. If you just take little baby steps, but you do it consistently, meaning you're actively involved in the blossoming of life, and that means it's hard work, it takes some discipline. But discipline brings life out. And so take baby steps for, say, 6 months consistently, and you'll know what I mean by infinite leaps. But that happens with consistent baby steps, And that's what the real kind of magic inside these yogic practices is found when it's done with some level of consistency. When you're building momentum, but you're also just building a relationship with yourself. Because the beautiful thing about a sadhana, daily practice, is that you have time with yourself in this way every day, kind of as a planned part of one's lifestyle. So then that's how you kind of the main catalyst, at least, that maintains your baby steps. The practice is the main catalyst, meaning that inside of a practice, the mind is going to come up, and meaning thoughts and emotions and everything. And during a practice time, though, we're not indulging those stories. We're not allowing our mind, or we're endeavoring not to allow our mind to drift off into this way and to drift off into that way. We're focused on ourselves, and we're focused on the life force in our body, and we're focused on the vitality of our body. We only have these bodies for a small amount of time, relatively, and the older we get, that relativity really shows us it is absolutely a small amount of time, And on the other hand, we got all the time in the world. So it's both of those things, And that's why often this, when you're just looking at it more like just rigid science, it can get confusing. But if you make sure it's also art, and it's poetry, it's mysticism, but it's not. It's practical mysticism. It's Dharma Physics. It's the physics of the mind. It's understanding how the mind swings this way and that way, and how to get it to center itself, so that it's not draining the vitality with unnecessary anxiousnesses and jealousies and all of the difficult emotions that, if we're really starting to pay attention to them and be non-tolerant of them, first allowing ourselves to feel them, allowing the suffering that they provoke to be felt. If I'm jealous, that is a state of suffering itself. There's nothing wrong with it. It's human emotion, but I'm just not trying to hang out there. It's a personal choice. And so then, if I feel that, and this is the layers upon layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of how the mind and its activities always kind of grasping towards pleasure and trying to push away pain. And so then, if you have the daily practice happening, it just continues to shine a light on the patterning of the mind. Meanwhile, you're starting to feel good, because doing that good exercises, getting the chi centered in the nervous system on a daily basis, boom, start to feel like ourselves. Self-confidence comes up, because you can feel the energy in the body. Self-confidence doesn't mean even self-confidence towards other people. Self-confidence can be self-confidence to live more courageously in the world, to not be shrinking down too much, because it is scary, and there's so much uncertainty. And we're tender human beings, sensitive, so sensitive. And so allowing ourselves to feel that, but bringing the vitality up in the system so we can enjoy life, and so that we can be participating in it, because there is only so much time that we'll be able to breathe. And so sadhana, daily practice, is like the best thing once it gets in a rhythm, once it gets going. And that's, so having that little time where one is both kind of taking care of the vitality of the body, and thus the vitality of the mind. Vitality of the body means it has vigor, it has health. Vitality of the mind means it has relative contentment, it has happiness, it has some happiness. Vitality of the heart, vitality of spirit is love, as you feel the love. And so that's what we want: vitality of the body, vitality of the mind, vitality of the heart, vitality of the spirit. And those are three things that all of us can practically take care of if we choose to, if we want to. And there's so many great practices to do it. It just takes choosing one and doing it for a period of time. And so today we're doing a great practice, and it's a great time of the year to do this when the sun is in the center of Libra. It's called Swati Nakshatra, and that's where the sun is currently. And Swati is ruled by Vayu, which is the deified wind. So the Vayu is the wind, the prana that moves through the body. It comes in and then goes out. When it comes in, it takes what they call the form of Prana Vayu. And when it goes out, it's called the positively charged chi, life force. When it goes out, it takes the form of Apana Vayu, which is the negatively charged prana, the eliminating wind. Apana Vayu governs your elimination each morning. If there's constipation there, Apana Vayu. Yeah, prana vayu is what comes in through the senses, and also when you eat food, it's what brings prana, life, into the body. It's what brings information through the five senses of hearing, sight, taste, touch, fragrance. It's how we experience life, the avenues of consciousness, the five senses. And so when then energy is coming in via prana vayu, which seats in the heart, then what happens is it gets circulated by what's called the circulating wind, vyana vayu. It goes from the center out to the periphery. And then what you have is sammana vayu. Vyana vayu lives also in the heart. Sammana vayu lives in the small intestine. That's the digesting wind, the wind that goes from the periphery to the center. So the digesting wind. And when this wind is erratic, then digestion goes off, and both physically in the body, but also in the mind. Indigestion of the mind is the inability for me to process the experiences of my life without proper elimination of that which is non-necessary, and therefore I become overwhelmed by the circumstances of my life, and I can fall into a depression, or I can fall into anxiousness or anger, these types of things. This is what happens in human life. But the nice thing to know about it is that you can work with the body. You can work with your actual chi, your life force. This is the real brilliance of things like Kundalini Yoga. It has all of this understanding inside of it. And so and all of the Kriyas work with all of the Vayus. But the one that we focus on often first is the digesting part of the body, the navel point. Because if you can get that strong, then the whole rest of the system gets strong as well. That's why they say everything begins with digestion. And if the digestion goes off, that's why everything else goes off. So you focus there, but it's true also at the level of the chi, the life force. So then you have, so energy comes in, prana vayu, circulates, and then digests, and that which is then kind of metabolized in the organism can project out. They call it udana vayu, the upward moving wind. And that's because also on the subtle level, this is you download, you receive things in, but you also upload. So in a either religious or mystical context, that would be called prayer. But one doesn't have to think about it in religious context if religious context makes one contract. Then, yeah. Psh. But so for another person, religion may open their heart, then okay, beautiful. So we just need to know ourselves and trust ourselves. So, but to know that I can upload is important, because what I put into the field is going to circulate back to me. But try, it's the physics of things. And so the more and the more I can be uploading in a certain way love, I'm not only endeavoring to be concerned for others in my interaction with others, but when I'm even doing my practice, my daily practice, part of that practice is not just to do the physical stuff, but to actually arouse the heart and to center one's motivation in what is going to cause the mind to achieve its happiness. And to cause the mind to achieve its happiness, step one is to make sure that we are continuing to strengthen our concern for others in the same way that we're concerned for ourselves. It's the basic physics of things. That's why in all the great spiritual traditions, that is the rule or the principle or the virtue that is kind of above all others, is lend a helping hand. You know. So the pranavayu and apanavayu, what's coming in and what's coming out, and the energy at the navel point. If you get those strong, which is what we'll do, is then all the other ones kind of come into balance. And so the rest of it just has to be experienced, because until it gets like an embodied experience, it just kind of remains up here. But the experience of it is a centered energy to where finally the mind, even though maybe it's been totally depressed, understandable, no? To feel totally depressed or totally freaked out and anxious and worried Even though maybe not so much that we still can't put on like enough of a calm manner to go out in our lives and, connect with people. But underneath the surface, many of us are feeling very, very anxious. Understandable. Why? Of course we are. But to not let that spin too far is to take care of oneself. Is to always kind of watching that. It's not pushing it, it's not suppressing it, it's feeling it. By feeling it, we learn about it. By feeling about it, then we can feel also how it's uncomfortable. And when it feels uncomfortable and we just allow ourselves, but not feeling it, we don't even get to the point where we realize it feels uncomfortable. We're already reacting to it. You see what I mean? It's staying up in the head. And we're reacting. Bring it into the body and feel what it feels like in the body. And allow it to be felt little by little, baby steps. As we feel more comfortable with the whole process, the safer you feel to feel a little deeper. Feel a little deeper, but to not indulge always the stories that those feelings provoke, the narratives that those feelings provoke. That's what a daily practice is about during that time in particular, is to feel, observe, and some days it's not, by the way, difficult feelings. It's like amazing, like everything's kind of going good, and you're feeling great. But even that, it's the same process. You're not getting too high off. You're not allowing oneself to get too high off of sensations that are provoked from external circumstances. Ooh, my bank account went up. Okay, cool. It's not to deny that and say that the same way. It says it doesn't feel good. It does feel good. Enjoy. Feel it. But don't get hypnotized by it. All of these things, even a relationship longing for it comes together. It's so intoxicating. So to say to not get hypnotized by it doesn't mean to not enjoy it. In fact, quite the opposite. But it's to appreciate it for what it actually is. And you never know how things are. Things come and things go. So always when we're not relying on our external situations to be the primary source of our happiness, then all the other things benefit. If you got a relationship with somebody who's not allowing the external circumstances of life to dominate their state of happiness or unhappiness, you're gonna have a good partner, because they're gonna be solid in themselves. And then they'll be able to be present for you when you need presence, and then vice versa. So it actually benefits the relationship, because it'll be less attachment, less attachment. And it's not to mean that relationships aren't attached. We are. That's what a relationship is, but less attachment to what our expectations are for each other, less attachment to what this even is, less attachment to certain preferences of things and how we think about each other and what we expect from one another. And it allows us to think clearly. It allows us to see clearly. But it's a difficult thing. The relationships are the most powerful of the yogas, they say, because it just reflects so much back to you so much quicker, really. And then if you throw a kid into there, look out, right? The parents know, and the kids come. First of all, it brings you back into your childhood. And you get to remember what it's like to be a kid. It's cool. And it's like we can become childlike. But then all the other things that happens as a child, it brings up. And so all these, to the yogi, become yogas. These are not outside of this. There's not a spiritual life and a non-spiritual life. Then the great honor of raising a person, raising a child, is like a precious yoga that you kind of, give your everything towards, of course. But same with a relationship. If going to enter into it, it's treated like a precious yoga. And so that's how all of life becomes that way, particularly when there's some sort of daily practice that is maintaining the orientation towards that. Making sense? In other words, all of life is starting to become experienced as something that is opening us up into supreme nature, reality, love. But you gotta try, test, you know? Life is difficult in either way. It's totally difficult, this. It's totally difficult. It's full of heartbreak, you know? But it's also full of ecstasy. It's both. But then, guess what? Even in the heartbreak, after there's a little bit of ecstasy. That's good. Because why? Even heartbreak is making us feel so much love. And because the attachment is less, we can open up into that love and not cling on to the things that are no longer occurring. Yeah? The child is little and then they get older. What happened? And then they get older, you know? And the innocence is not there in the same way. It's like if we're attached to or our kids, they're going in a total different direction than we had hoped and how we had saw it in our mind. And then because we're so attached, we're causing our children suffering that then they have to deal with later, you know? And so we all do that. And our parents did that to us. But it's not a judgment here. There's no judgment about any of it. It's just observing what is happening based on our own experience and feeling how we feel about it and acting it through love, you know? Then you can totally know that about our parents and then about how we are with our kids. And you can be real about it, and because it's not a judgment on it. It's all in the spirit of healing and blossoming and growing and becoming happy. Yes, healing. But healing is also going the full distance of really totally becoming happy. That's what, to me, a human potential is all about.
Thanks for watching on YouTube. Best easy way to stay in touch with us. Hit the subscribe button here. You'll see our videos when they come up. If you enjoyed this one, hit the like button. It'll help more people see it, help the channel grow. I appreciate you watching.